Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Chen and I'm currently an assistant professor at the School of Information at San Jose State University. In this lecture, I'll be talking about the big picture of big data with a special focus on its role in library and information science. Specifically, I'll cover topics related to what is big data, why is it important for us, librarians and information professionals, to understand big data. What are some of the challenges in big data, and also what is the emerging job market in big data? I hope you'll find this lecture interesting and useful, and I look forward to seeing you. Thank you.